This is the What Just Happened series of the Just Security podcast. I'm David Aaron. Today we're actually talking not about something that just happened, but something that might be about to happen. That is the sunset or expiration of the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015. If Congress does not renew that statute, it will expire at the end of this month. Now, this act is not a big, glamorous piece of legislation. It does things like remove barriers to companies sharing information about cyber threats, address privacy concerns, and require the federal government to share threat information. A big purpose of this act was to resolve unsettled questions about whether companies actually take on legal risk by sharing cyber threat intelligence with each other and with the government. As our guest will explain, even if the act itself, in its text, looks a little bland, many consider it to be one of the foundations of US cybersecurity efforts, which doesn't exactly need its foundation weakened at this particular moment in time. Our guest today is Cynthia Kaiser. Cynthia is the former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Cyber Division, where she led policy and intelligence efforts to disrupt adversaries and protect victims. Cynthia now leads Halcyon's Ransomware Research Center. At Halcyon, Cynthia drives threat research and leads collaboration across sectors to counter the ransomware threat. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope I'm not putting the nation at risk by taking you off task while we talk.
Oh gosh, I'm just thankful to be here. And I mean, this is such an important topic for us to be discussing.
Excellent, excellent. Before we start, I'm just going to give our listeners a note. The acronym for the statute we're talking about is CISA, CISA. That's also now the acronym for an agency within the Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We're going to try to use terms like the Act and CISA 2015 when we're talking about this statute, but if you hear us say CISA, we're talking about the Act, not the agency. Now, Cynthia, before we get into the 2015 Act, you've sat in some pretty significant seats in US cybersecurity. Some people in the audience may take for granted that there's a centralized cybersecurity agency or highly centralized, organized cybersecurity effort in the United States. So before we start, can you describe the challenges that face US cybersecurity and how the United States, for lack of a better way to say it, does cybersecurity?
Absolutely. And I had a front row seat into some of this evolution. When I came on board to FBI Cyber Division, it was back in 2017. So I think we might have spelled cyber with an S at that point. But really, it was just when we were starting to realize how much we needed a lot of people, how much we needed other companies, other agencies, how global the threat was, and that we couldn't take for granted just doing something in a silo. And so, really, what's evolved over the last few years is a process where private sector is sharing threat information with the government sharing that information with each other because companies may go to different agencies within the government. And then we take off and FBI does the investigation into incidents, works towards conducting disruption, takedown operations against these adversaries, work across the intelligence community to try to make that happen, but then switch that over and try to get the information defenders need out to protect their systems. It's a cycle where a cybersecurity company might understand and have more insight into something's wrong right now. This feels not right, right? We have a lot of telemetry, we have a lot of information across our customers, and this doesn't look like it's good. Then someone comes into that, if they take that into the FBI, what the FBI can then do is enrich it. They can use appropriate legal process to learn more. What are the adversaries actually doing? Like, how can we contextualize this and understand who might be behind it? And then that sharing goes back and forth. And it's a tipping and queuing relationship across industry, across government that really has made us safer.
So, I mean, you made a few references to the private sector. Fair to say, a challenge that presented to cybersecurity is that a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the attack surface, isn't owned or controlled by the government.
Absolutely. cybersecurity companies have more insight than the government does into what might be happening on customer networks. And I think everybody wants that to be the case. Like we want to be able to protect uh, individuals, protect companies, allow them to have the ability to do what they think is right on their networks, and then make decisions about what can be shared back into the government.
So yeah, so we've got the wires, the servers,
Mhm.
the networks. These are owned largely by the private sector, and they're not, generally policed by some government agency. And as you say, there's a lot of privacy. There's First Amendment concerns about
Mhm.
what's flying over those wires. Um, and meanwhile, so that creates a fairly large attack surface. And from an adversary perspective, there's a big diversity of cyber threats, right?
Well, absolutely. You have nation states, ever increasing numbers of nation states who really can conduct this activity. You have cyber criminals, some of whom are kids just learning how to do this work and trying to get their credentials in the cyber underground, and then others who are almost quasi nation state, or it's even just very difficult to distinguish between proxies and non-state actors and the nation states themselves. And so you have a big mix, some advanced, some not advanced, but all are attacking US networks.
So we have a decentralized threat or attack surface, decentralized threat picture, um, and to counter that, it seems that the U.S. government generally, not exclusively, relies on encouraging voluntary reporting as opposed to, other than some sectors, establishing like minimum security requirements or even mandatory reporting. Is that, as a general statement, pretty accurate?
As a general statement, I also think that I'm supportive of some of the requirements that are being considered or put into place. Think there's a CISA, which is a mandatory reporting requirement amongst critical infrastructure sectors that I do think would make the government's work a little bit better, but it doesn't mean that all the information all the time is going to be shared. That's kind of a minimum baseline to try to help others. But overall, uh, what happens now is the government can warn more people if more people warn the government.
Right. Right. So there's a lot of removing barriers to information sharing, encouraging information sharing, and then doing something with the information that's shared, which I think is critical too. So yeah, I would agree. We have some mandatory reporting, like CIRCIA, even the SEC. There's some sector specific security mandates, certainly enforcement after problems occur by FTC and others, but voluntary sharing I think it is really a lot of what we're talking about here. Um, so let's look at the statute that's expiring and what it does and the effect that its sunset could have. I'm not going to read the statute out loud to our audience, but at a high level, it defines terms, which every statute should do. That's important here because it really does tell us what the scope of the law is and what it does and doesn't cover, and it gives everyone in this decentralized ecosystem a common vocabulary. It gives some degree of protection for information that companies share with the US government, as long as they do it through the approved channels. It doesn't really add protection, but by sharing with the government, companies aren't going to lose protection. It protects against FOIA disclosure, for example, and sharing with the government doesn't waive privilege. It does require the federal government to share information back, which is really important.
Mhm.
I think where you've been in the government and where I've been in the government, there's kind of a need to know ethos rather than a need to share ethos. And it limits how the government can use that information, which I think is a response largely to privacy concerns. So you've seen the evolution of all of this before the 2015 Act, before CISA 2015. What were the challenges that lawmakers and the cybersecurity community were trying to address?
They were trying to remove barriers to companies sharing with the US government. And by that I mean some of those can be just companies are going to go through various risk analysis for if they're going to share with the government, like what are the positives? What are the drawbacks? Like how might they be putting their business more at risk? And so what this act attempted to do was change that calculus to remove a risk of certain liability concerns that they might have in sharing information that the government needed to know, enabling them to be more proactive, to have more comfort that they were legally protected in that sharing as well. And I think this is an oft missed part of the act, enabling the sharing across industry. So ensuring that we didn't have antitrust violations because you know, two major companies were sharing with each other.
Yeah, I was surprised when when this act got passed and everyone was talking about resolving questions about antitrust concerns. I'll admit I was surprised that antitrust concerns were presenting this kind of barrier. And so answering that question once and for all, I think it was more the uncertainty than a conclusion that was bothering people.
That's exactly right. And I think that is, it's like the act was meant to remove that uncertainty, to remove varying levels of cooperation that just might be based on different interpretations and really standardize it so that companies who wanted to help could.
Right. And they wouldn't have to worry that if information was privileged, so subject to the attorney-client privilege, for example, they didn't have to worry that by providing it to the government, they were waiving that privilege, which could ordinarily be the case.
Or uh, concerns about what may be contained from customer information, like within the information that's being shared with the government. So really a host of not having to finally parse exactly what might be coming to the government, but still understanding FBI every day has requests for ensuring that there are additional legal process behind obtaining some of the more sensitive information. The companies can do that too.
So really, the it seems like the statute was looking at all the reasons that an otherwise willing company would have second thoughts about providing cybersecurity threat information and just whittling away at each one of those to get rid of those barriers, like you say. So after the act was passed and signed into law and the structures were built up around it, what did you see change as a result of the enactment?
Well, I think it really kickstarted the public-private partnerships that you see today, and it demonstrated the obligation that the government had towards private industry. So when I came on board in early 2017, we were really just starting to think, okay, we're getting some of this information now in from our partners in the private sector, whether that's victims, whether that's cybersecurity companies. How do we then translate this and get this actually back out? So all that information coming in allowed us to create the advisories that you see today, to create the back and forth two-way information sharing that I don't think we would have had otherwise.
Yeah, you said that the act quietly became the backbone of
Yeah.
U.S. cyber defense, and I mean I don't want to speak for you. When you say quietly, that kind of got my attention. That it was almost like a stealth effect. What do you mean by it did that quietly?
I think over time became just the matter of course. And that's what I mean by quietly is, over time, the concerns that the private sector may have had about sharing with the government, like just weren't part of that conversation anymore.
Yeah, it's not like the act came out and demanded, "Oh, okay, everyone, now we're doing this thing, and everyone has to do it." It was more like you say,
Mhm.
uh, opening that door that everyone wanted to walk through.
Yes, without any regulations.
Yeah, really interesting. Um, all right, so some structures got built in the wake of this act.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about information sharing and analysis organizations and centers?
Certainly. I mean, there's so many of them out there, and so many of them do such great work. So, first, you have CISA 2015 come out, and then a few years later is when CISA, the agency, uh, is pulled out of main DHS and allowed to stand alone, and that really ensured that we were able to start coordinating across the government for what information we needed to know to protect US networks. And peeling that back further, like it's hard for me to imagine back in 2017, 2018, if FBI had some information we were going to put out, it was an FBI product. And if DHS did, it was a DHS product. And maybe they're on the same topic and net defenders are getting this all at once. And so really what we've been able to change is the partnerships, not just company X has a relationship with DHS and company Y has a relationship with FBI. It's these companies have a relationship with the government sharing with each other in real time. We have people sitting with each other. We're collaborating. We're bringing the best person that's able to look at this one issue together. And then we can turn that around and get that information back out to all these other companies. And it has this expansive effect where uh, maybe there was just a little bit of sharing at first, and it grew and it grew and it grew to where you have now a lot of the cybersecurity companies share as a matter of course with the government. You have the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative out of DHS, where we're all on Slack messages and groups together talking about cyber threat information. How how crazy is that to think about from where we were just a decade ago?
Yeah, I never thought I'd hear FBI and Slack in the same pair. Um, it's interesting, and I think now is probably a good time to point out that there is a lot of information sharing that goes on, and that's all in the interest of network defense and developing best practices, pushing out cyber information, cyber security information. Um, there is some personal information obviously flying around as well on the internet. I think it's important for everyone to understand that what net defenders are looking at and what they need, the indicators and the security measures are generally not the personal information that is, also traversing the internet.
You are absolutely right. Um, we used to talk about where when the FBI came to a company and was talking, they were worried that we might want the content of, emails that were going back and forth with their suppliers. It's like that's not what was of interest in a cyber investigation. It's the metadata behind uh, what's going on. It's the network indicators. It's the information that it helps investigators like us find bad guys and figure out what's happening, but what's going on in day-to-day business very rarely affects any of that, and is any even like no one wants data they can't use anyways, right? So I mean, like we don't want it, don't need it. It's inappropriate to have it. If what we want is the good information that helps us just catch these bad guys.
So those privacy protective aspects of the statute don't really get in the way of investigations. They probably clear some noise so you can better focus on signal.
Exactly. And there was a lot of concerns when the act was first approved, where privacy advocates were concerned that this would create a foundation for greater sharing of people's private information and would violate those types of protections we might have in place. I think over 10 years, that just hasn't borne out. Yeah,
Right.
and that speaks more volumes than any words we can all say. That in 10 years, what we've wanted was the metadata. What we've wanted is the information that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but is invaluable to investigators.
Excellent. So we've seen those relationships build. We've probably seen levels of trust among agencies and between agencies and private sector develop. We have these information sharing and analysis centers, or ISACs, that are often
Mhm.
kind of industry specific or sector specific, fora in which companies and the government can share specific threat indicator information and best practices for net defense. Um, as we said, this law has a built-in expiration date. We have all these structures, we have all these institutions, we have all these relationships. Um, if the law expires and it's not reenacted, what happens to that?
I think a lot of confusion at first. So I've spoken with a lot of outside counsels, so counsels who are talking to companies about after a breach or even before, and about whether their advice might have to change. And the answer has been a resounding yes. Like, the advice on risk calculus is going to have to change. And it's still a company's choice to share, but there's going to be a pause, and there's going to be more thought put into what exactly can we share. Is it going to slow it down, that sharing, substantially? As well as it could impact the industry to industry sharing that makes us all safer. So, you noted my new job at Halcyon's Ransomware Research Center. Our entire premise is, let's unite experts and defenders and bring them together to create and put out really good intelligence around ransomware, instead of having it be too siloed across industry. Um, if there's concerns on company side about what that sharing looks like, it just makes everybody less safe.
Yeah, and I think, if the authority goes away and those barriers go back up, even if it's just for some period of time until Congress gets around to reenacting it, you could see some of those institutions wither and some of those relationships kind of go stale. It takes time to build all that, both the institutions and the relationships, and so we could be, set more than a few steps back, I think. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I would also note, information about cyber threats changes constantly. It's not like something a year ago is incredibly useful today. So if you're talking about a month, or 2 months where that sharing isn't occurring, what's going to really happen is there's more attacks. And it's probably going to be attacks against organizations that can't afford specific boutique cybersecurity solutions.
You elaborate on that a little bit. What types of companies or organizations are you thinking of at first?
So I'm thinking, and I noted this in some of my writing, I have a lot of concerns on the small and medium-sized businesses that they can't buy every cyber tool out there. And if they're not getting the sharing that they've their entire IT programs have been pivoted around, or maybe their one IT person has come to understand and know, uh, the adversaries are going to have a better chance of getting in. What's the most concerning here is, take ransomware. The average downtime for an organization after a ransomware attack is over 20 days. A lot of small or medium-sized organizations don't have enough cash on hand to weather that kind of downtime. And so you might see more and more businesses close as a result of these cyber attacks. It's really, to me, a economically frightening scenario.
There's going to be a potentially existential threat to small and medium-sized businesses who are more vulnerable to downtime and who have less access to the kind of big industrial strength, cover everything cybersecurity if that sharing isn't in place.
Exactly.
And I would imagine that some of these small and medium-sized businesses might also be part of the supply chain for larger businesses. So we see that second and third order effect spread.
Absolutely. Uh, Depending on where these attacks might occur, you're going to see a lot of dependencies start to deteriorate. And that's not just in the uh, businesses that are purely commercial. A lot of these suppliers, or a lot of just even small groups, are critical infrastructure. They're part of the fabric that our friends, family, and community rely on in their communities to be able to uh, go to a hospital, drink clean water, be able to access transportation.
So it sounds like you're not exactly on the fence about whether this act should be reauthorized, and I think you've written that you favor a clean reauthorization. Let's not tinker with it. Let's just get it done, keep it in place. Is that fair to say?
I think I note, I think the easiest path is a clean reauthorization, but I know there's been some bills that, or some versions of it that have gotten out of committee that I think make some good evolutions too. Like, if we had all of the time in the world and we could clarify some of the liability protections, I think that'd be valuable. But if we need to do a clean reauthorization for a few months so we can get to that point, what we can't have is a lapse, even if it's short term.
So we also can't accept downtime. We
That's right.
we we need it to continue, even if it does need to be fixed after a reauthorization. And I hate asking people to look into the future, but how does it look for reauthorization right now?
I think that there's a lot of bipartisan support, and that's what I hear from folks on the Hill. They want to get this passed. It's not seen as on its surface, it's not overly controversial at all. And the devil's in the details, trying to ensure that those minor details or minor tweaks that various people want to have adjusted are able to be arbitrated. And that's why I think the most likely scenario we're looking at is, and like I'm most hopeful for, is that let's clean reauthorize it for a few months, allow us that time to arbitrate any of those changes, because we're looking at a few weeks right now,
Right.
and we're almost in mid-September. And you get to the end of September, and that's around the budget, yeah, with all of this budgets like negotiations going on too. So I have a lot of concerns about the timing, not about the intent down in the Hill.
Well, let's hope that you're right, that we'll have the clean reauthorization, and after that there will be time to discuss how to modify and improve the bill, and I hope that as those proposals develop, you'll be back to share your thoughts about those and the directions they should go in.
I'd welcome that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time to be with us. In all seriousness, we know you're busy, and we really do thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of the What Just Happened podcast was hosted by me, David Aaron, and produced by Clara Apps. Special thanks to our guest, Cynthia Kaiser. You can read all of Just Security's coverage of cybersecurity and other national security matters on our website, and we'll list in the show notes some of Cynthia's writing on this topic. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.